I slammed my shoulder against my apartment door, trying to force it shut against a gust of freezing wind that tears through the hallway of my building in Chicago. The metal door frame is cold enough to sting, and my hands shake as I grip the edge, breath coming out in sharp, uneven bursts that fog the air in front of me. A grocery bag slips from my arm before I can catch it, and apples roll across the hallway floor, one hitting my foot with a dull thud as I kneel down, too tired to chase after the others. I tried to lift the bag, but my fingers fail me. Everything inside spills onto the cold tile cans. A box of pasta, a carton of milk that lands hard enough to dent. I stay there, frozen on my knees. The hallway light flickering above me in a rhythm that feels like it's mocking the way my heart beats. Irregular, struggling, barely there. The world feels too heavy to stand, too heavy to move, too heavy to exist in. My chest tightens, not in fear, but in exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones, that makes even breathing feel like work. I whisper something, though I don't know what. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's everything. The sound doesn't even reach my own ears. I lift my head when I sense movement behind me. My body tenses, preparing for a neighbor, for judgment, for someone to see me like this, broken on the floor of a hallway that smells like old carpet and radiator heat. But it's not what I expect. It's not a person at all. And in that moment, something shifts in the air around me, something I can't name yet, but can feel pressing against the edges of my awareness, waiting. Before I tell you what happened that day in Chicago, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. These stories help more people than you think. And if you've ever lived on autopilot or felt invisible, even when people were looking right at you, tell me in the comments. You're not alone in this. I promise you that. My name is Emily Carver, and I've lived in Chicago, Illinois for the last 12 years. My apartment is on the 9th floor of a quiet, high-rise building near Lake Michigan, the kind of place where people nod politely in the elevator and never ask questions. My windows overlook the gray lake, and on clear days I can see the horizon stretch out endlessly, which used to feel comforting but started feeling like a reminder of how far away I was from everything that mattered. On paper, I was functioning. I had a job at an insurance company downtown, bills paid on time, a smile that appeared at the right moments during meetings and small talk in the break room. People would say things like, "You're so calm," or "You really have it together." And I would nod because what else could I do? How do you explain to someone that you don't feel like you're living your life, but watching it happen from somewhere far away, like you're a ghost in your own body? Most nights I didn't even notice when the day ended. I would sit on my couch, staring at the television without seeing it, and suddenly it would be midnight and I wouldn't remember anything that happened between 6 and 12. The hours just disappeared. Days blended into each other like watercolors left out in the rain. No edges, no definition, just a gray smear that I moved through without feeling. I wasn't sad in the way people expect sadness to look. I wasn't crying in corners or writing desperate journal entries or reaching out for help. I was just empty, hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only the shell. Still walking, still working, still breathing, but not really alive. Friends would text and I would respond with the right emojis, the right words, the right tone, but I felt nothing. Co-workers would invite me to happy hours and I would go, and I would laugh at jokes, and no one ever suspected that I was barely holding on. That's the thing about functional depression. It's invisible. You can be drowning and still look like you're swimming. I remember one morning standing at the bathroom sink, staring at my reflection and trying to remember if I had already washed my face. I couldn't tell. I couldn't remember. I just stood there, water dripping from my hands, staring at a stranger in the mirror who looked like me but felt like no one. The autopilot life became my existence. Wake up, shower, dress, work, eat, sleep, repeat. No colors, no sounds that mattered, no moments that stuck. Just motion without meaning, like a machine running on fumes, waiting for something to either fix it or let it finally stop. And then one night in late January, everything changed. I stepped outside my building, exhausted from another day I couldn't quite remember, and I heard something unusual, something that made me stop, something that pulled me out of the fog, even if just for a moment. It was a cold Chicago night, the kind where the air feels sharp enough to cut, and the street lamps buzzed softly above me, casting weak circles of yellow light onto the icy sidewalk. Snow had started falling earlier in the evening, muffling the distant traffic and making the city feel smaller, quieter, like the world had pulled a blanket over itself and gone to sleep. I was only outside because I had forgotten to check my mailbox for 3 days, and my landlord had left a note under my door reminding me that uncollected mail was a lease violation. So there I was, keys in hand, breath visible in the freezing air, moving on, autopilot toward the metal mailbox wall near the building entrance. That's when I heard it. A soft, scratching sound, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from somewhere near the dumpsters beside the building. At first, I tensed. My mind went to the worst possibilities. Raccoons? Something dangerous. I gripped my keys tighter, ready to turn around and go back inside. But then a shape stepped into the weak circle of light cast by the street lamp. A dog, medium-sized, thin enough that I could see the outline of his ribs beneath his soaked fur, trembling from the cold or fear, or both. His coat was matted and dirty, streaked with mud and melted snow, and his eyes, dark and wide, were fixed on me with a strange mix of caution and hope. He didn't bark. He didn't move closer. He just stood there, watching me, waiting for something I couldn't name. His ears were folded back slightly, not in aggression, but in uncertainty. Like he was asking a question he didn't have the words for. "I don't know why," I whispered. Hey, maybe because the silence felt too heavy. Maybe because he looked like he needed to hear a voice that wasn't angry or afraid. When the word left my mouth, he tilted his head just slightly. And something about that gesture, that unmistakable sign of recognition, made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt in months. I should have walked away. I should have gone inside, called animal control, let someone else handle it. But I didn't. I crouched down slowly, keeping my distance, and reached out my hand. He didn't come closer, but he didn't run either. He just watched me, breathing hard, his sides rising and falling in quick, shallow movements. "You're freezing," I said, though I didn't know why I was talking to a dog who couldn't answer. But the sound of my own voice saying something true, something that mattered, felt strange and important in a way I couldn't explain. I stood up and walked toward my building entrance, glancing back over my shoulder. He followed, keeping a careful distance, his paws leaving small prints in the fresh snow. I held the door open, and he hesitated at the threshold, looking up at me like he was asking permission. I nodded, even though it was ridiculous to nod at a dog, and he stepped inside. The warmth of the building hit both of us at once, and I watched as he shook, scattering droplets of melted snow across the tile floor. He looked up at me again, and this time I saw something I recognized. Something I had been seeing in my own reflection for months. Exhaustion, loneliness, the quiet kind of suffering that doesn't make noise but never really goes away. "Come on," I said, and I started walking toward the elevator. He followed. I told myself it was just for the night, that I would dry him off, give him some food, let him rest, and figure out what to do in the morning. I told myself it was temporary, that I wasn't ready for this, that I didn't have the energy to take care of anything, not even myself. But as we rode the elevator up to the 9th floor, him sitting quietly beside me, I felt something stirring, something warm and unfamiliar, like a pilot light flickering on after months of being cold. And I realized, standing in that small metal box with a stray dog who had no reason to trust me, that maybe I didn't want him to leave. That maybe, for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to be alone. I brought him upstairs and unlocked my apartment door, half expecting him to bolt the moment he saw the space. But he didn't. He walked in gently, carefully, as if afraid to disturb the air around him, and stood in the middle of my small living room, looking around with quiet curiosity. I grabbed an old towel from the bathroom and knelt down beside him. He let me dry him without protest, sitting perfectly still as I worked the towel over his soaked fur. His body was tense at first, but slowly, as the minutes passed, I felt him relax under my hands. He watched me the entire time, eyes dark and steady, like he could see straight through me, like he knew things I hadn't told anyone. When I finished, I filled a bowl with water and set it on the kitchen floor. He drank slowly, carefully, like he wasn't sure if it was allowed. I opened a can of tuna because I didn't have dog food and put it on a plate. He ate in small, polite bites, glancing up at me between each one, as if checking to make sure I wasn't going to take it away. That night I lay in bed, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the crushing weight of silence. I could hear him breathing in the living room, the soft sound of his presence filling the empty spaces in my apartment. I fell asleep faster than I had in weeks. The next morning, I awoke to a soft nudge against my hand. I opened my eyes, disoriented, and found him sitting beside my bed, watching me. His tail wagged once, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to be there. I reached out and touched his head, and he leaned into my palm, eyes closing briefly. It was such a simple gesture, but it broke something open inside me, something that had been locked and rusted and forgotten. "Good morning," I whispered, and he wagged his tail again, this time with more confidence. I realized I didn't want him to leave. I didn't want to call anyone or take him to a shelter or put up signs. I wanted him to stay, and so he did. The days that followed were different. I started waking earlier because he would nudge my hand every morning at 7, gently but insistently, until I got up. At first, it annoyed me, but then I realized that for months, I had been waking up at noon, groggy and disoriented, feeling like I'd missed something important. Now I was waking with a purpose, even if that purpose was just letting a dog outside. We started taking walks around the block, short ones at first because he was still thin and tired easily, and honestly, so did I. But those walks became small rituals of re-entry into the world. I started noticing things I had stopped seeing, the red brick buildings with their old iron fire escapes, The green traffic lights that turned yellow at the intersections, the blue lake stretching out endlessly under the gray Chicago sky. Color started coming back. Not all at once, but slowly, like someone was turning up the saturation on a photograph that had been faded for too long. I noticed the yellow of a taxicab, the orange of a construction cone, the pink of a scarf on a woman passing by. Small things, ordinary things, but they mattered. In the evenings, he would curl up against my side on the couch, his head resting on my leg, and I would sit there, grounding myself in the weight of him. When my mind started to drift into that fog, when I felt myself slipping away, he would shift slightly, reminding me that I was still here, that I was still real. My apartment didn't feel painfully silent anymore. It felt lived in. There were dog toys scattered on the floor, cheap ones I'd picked up at a corner store, and a blanket folded on the couch where he slept. There were sounds, the jingle of his collar, the soft thud of his tail against the floor, the rhythmic breathing that filled the space between my thoughts. One night I was cooking dinner, actually cooking, not just reheating something, and he was sitting in the kitchen, watching me with that steady gaze he always had. I opened a container of black pepper, and he leaned forward to sniff it, then sneezed so suddenly and violently that he stumbled backward. I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from your chest and surprises you because you forgot what it sounded like. I stopped stirring the pot and just stood there smiling, listening to the sound of my own laughter fading into the quiet. He looked up at me, tail wagging, and I realized it was the first genuine laugh I'd had in months, maybe a year, maybe longer. I started keeping a better schedule, not because I was forcing myself to, but because he needed me to. He needed to be fed. He needed to be walked. He needed to go outside and come back in and have water and attention and care. And somewhere in the middle of taking care of him, I started taking care of myself again. I started eating real meals. I started showering every day instead of every few days. I started opening the blinds in the morning instead of leaving them closed. Small things, tiny shifts, but they added up. I took him to a vet, and they told me he was probably around 3 years old, underweight, but otherwise healthy. They asked if I wanted to keep him, and I said yes without hesitating. I filled out the paperwork, paid for his shots and his microchip, and walked out of that clinic with the dog who now officially was mine. I named him Jasper. I don't know why. The name just felt right. At night, before I fell asleep, I would reach down and rest my hand on his side, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. It became a ritual, a reminder, a tether. And slowly, night by night, I started to feel like I was coming back to myself, like I was waking up from a long, dreamless sleep. A few weeks later, a heavy snowstorm hit Chicago, the kind that shuts down the city, that makes everything go quiet and still, almost sacred. The streets were empty, the usual noise of traffic replaced by the soft hush of falling snow. I bundled up in my coat and boots, and Jasper stood by the door, tail wagging, ready. We stepped outside, and the cold hit us immediately, sharp and clean. Jasper bounded forward into the snow, tail wagging wildly, jumping and twisting and diving into the drifts like he had never seen anything so wonderful in his life. I stood there on the sidewalk watching him, and something inside me cracked open. Relief, release, a sudden rush of warmth that spread through my chest and made my eyes sting with tears. I started crying right there in the middle of the sidewalk, but not the hopeless tears I used to fear. These tears felt different. They felt like breathing for the first time, like exhaling something I had been holding in for too long. Jasper stopped playing and trotted back to me, his face covered in snow, his eyes bright and happy. He pressed his head into my chest, right against my heart, and stood there, waiting, not rushing me, not asking for anything, just being there, solid and real and warm. I wrapped my arms around him and let myself cry until I couldn't anymore. And when I finally stopped, when I straightened up and wiped my face with the back of my glove, I felt lighter, like something heavy had finally let go of me. "Thank you," I whispered into his fur, and he leaned harder against me like he understood. Weeks later, the city began to thaw. Spring was coming, slow but steady, and Chicago looked different. Not because anything had changed, but because I was finally awake enough to see it. The lake wasn't just gray anymore. It had blues and greens and silvers shifting in the light. The buildings weren't just obstacles in my path. They were part of the city I lived in, part of the world I was finally present in. I walked along the lakeshore path with Jasper trotting proudly beside me, healthier now, his coat shining in the sunlight. People smiled at us as we passed, and I smiled back. Real smiles, not the automatic ones I used to wear like armor. I felt grounded, present, awake, like I had come home to myself after being lost for so long. I whispered his name, Jasper, and he looked up at me, tail wagging, eyes full of trust and love, and something I can only describe as recognition. We stopped at the water's edge, the wind cold but not unbearable, and I stood there, breathing in the clean air, feeling the weight of my own body in a way that didn't feel like a burden anymore. I was here. I was alive. And for the first time in a long time, I was glad. If this story touched you, or if a dog has ever changed your life, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. These stories matter, and they reach the people who need them most. I thought I was saving him, but he saved me.